It was July, 1944, and the Normandy hedgerows lay silent, deceptively so, under the pale light of dawn. Mist hovered low across the fields, drifting like a ghost over furrowed earth and shattered tree lines. Corporal James Jimmy Harlan, age 29, crouched by the idling M4A3 Sherman, wiping the grime from his oil-streaked hands onto a rag he had kept tucked into his belt. He had been a mechanic before the war, born and raised in Toledo, Ohio, with a love for engines that ran deeper than blood, a passion for pistons, gears, and valves that once earned him quiet admiration from friends and family. Now, that love had been redirected into something else: survival, duty, and a fierce, stubborn hope that he could help turn the tide of a war that had swallowed millions of lives. Beside him, Sergeant William Bill Matthews, a grizzled 36-year-old veteran with a penchant for sharp sarcasm and dry humour, adjusted his binoculars and squinted toward the horizon. The sun had barely crested, painting the morning fog in silver and grey. Across the field, a Tiger I loomed, a monstrous silhouette against the mist, its 40-ton bulk a symbol of German engineering excellence and terrifying lethality. Its thick armour plates glinted faintly, and the 88mm high-velocity cannon sat poised, a cold, silent threat that could obliterate the Sherman in a single, well-aimed shot. Bill muttered under his breath, "Looks like they're laughing again. They'll never believe what we've got under this hood." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jimmy's lips curved into a grim smile. Nearly every German soldier they had faced had mocked the Sherman. Ronson, Tommy Cooker, fire hazard in a tin can. The jokes had been cruel but consistent. Yet the Allies knew, something the Axis did not. The Sherman was not a one-trick pony. It might not have boasted the armour of the Tiger or the explosive power of the Panther, but it had something more valuable on the battlefield: reliability, mobility, ease of maintenance, and sheer numbers. And, in the right hands, it had an edge the enemy could never anticipate. Today, that edge would be revealed. Jimmy's mind drifted to the reports they had studied secretly in the evenings by candlelight, maps strewn across the floor of their temporary command post. The Tiger's crew relied on their fearsome reputation, armoured confidence, and precision fire to dominate. A 75mm Sherman could not pierce a Tiger head-on. Everyone knew that. But they also knew something the Germans had not accounted for: white phosphorus rounds. These were not conventional armour-piercing shells. They were incendiary, psychological, and devastating when used correctly. They could ignite a tank from within, choke the crew with smoke, and force them to abandon a machine thought invulnerable. Jimmy checked the loader's position and the orientation of the turret. He could feel the rhythm of the engine beneath him, a steady hum that reassured him despite the tension clawing at his chest. The Sherman's design, simple yet reliable, allowed for quick adjustments in the field, rapid firing sequences, and unexpected maneuvers that heavier tanks could not perform. Bill climbed onto the hull briefly, peering over the bow, noting the Tiger's barrel pivoting slowly, the optics tracking their every move. The German crew's confidence was palpable. They assumed the Sherman was no more than a mobile tin can, easily destroyed if engaged directly. The irony was that this overconfidence would be their downfall. Jimmy could almost hear the mocking laughter that had echoed through intercepted transmissions. Today, the mockery would end. The mist swirled as the Sherman moved forward. The tracks ground over damp earth, crushing wildflowers and reeds that had survived the artillery strikes of previous days. The smell of oil, gunpowder, residue, and wet metal filled the air. Jimmy's hands, still trembling slightly from adrenaline, loaded the first white phosphorus round into the 75mm gun. The shell gleamed under the diffuse morning light, ominous in its simplicity. "Ready?" Jimmy whispered, though the sound was lost in the fog. Bill gave a curt nod, his eyes never leaving the Tiger. "When that beast fires, we don't flinch. We force it to react, and we control the field," he said. voice low but firm. Jimmy's mind raced through the tactical scenarios they had rehearsed countless times. Approach from the flanks, keep the turret moving, fire continuously, never present a static target. The Sherman might not win a head-on duel with a Tiger, but strategy, mobility, and the right ammunition could flip the odds. The Tiger's cannon fired first, a deafening roar that shattered the morning quiet. The 88mm shell struck the ground nearby, sending earth and debris flying. Jimmy pressed the pedal, advancing and simultaneously rotating the turret to track the Tiger's vulnerable points. The Sherman's high rate of fire allowed multiple successive shells to launch before the Tiger could fully respond. With precise timing, Jimmy fired the white phosphorus round. The shell hissed as it arced through the fog, striking the rear of the Tiger's turret. Flames erupted, bright and sudden, casting erratic shadows across the battlefield. Smoke poured from the Tiger's vents and seams, curling in thick, white clouds that obscured vision and set the crew into immediate panic. The Tiger groaned under the assault, metal twisting and groaning as the fire spread internally. From the distant hedgerows, other Allied Sherman crews observed the exchange, anticipation rising with each passing second. Wordlessly, Jimmy and Bill maneuvered the Sherman to a new firing position, continuously applying pressure. The Tiger's crew attempted to respond, pivoting the turret, adjusting for range, but the thick armor could not compensate for disorientation caused by smoke and flames. Each successive round from the Sherman targeted vision ports, track links, and hatches. The crew's panic became apparent as one by one, they abandoned their positions, climbing out of the inferno with shouts, flailing to escape the fire that licked the interior. Time seemed to stretch as Jimmy reloaded, each movement deliberate but quick. He reflected on the paradox of the Sherman, often labelled obsolete, mocked, and underestimated, yet capable of delivering decisive effects when paired with ingenuity, crew skill, and the right ammunition. Its strength was not in a single, overwhelming feature, but in a combination of reliability, flexibility, and sheer adaptability. The white phosphorus rounds, once considered an auxiliary tool, had transformed the Sherman into a psychological and physical weapon capable of challenging even the most formidable German heavy tank. As the Tiger smouldered, smoke rising in thick columns that danced with the morning mist, Jimmy and Bill took a moment to assess the battlefield. The surrounding hedgerows and fields were littered with debris from earlier skirmishes, a testament to the ongoing struggle. Yet, in that quiet moment, they felt the weight of their achievement. The Sherman, once derided, had prevailed. It was a combination of firepower, mobility, and tactical understanding that had turned a medium tank into a lethal adversary. The Tiger, formidable on paper and in reputation, lay neutralized, its crew forced to abandon it under the very fire they had assumed could never harm them. Bill clapped Jimmy on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking across his dirt-streaked face. "I told them they'd regret laughing at us," he said. Jimmy nodded, watching the smoke drift upward, carrying with it the smell of burning metal and phosphorus. Around them, other Shermans advanced cautiously, their crews emboldened by the display of ingenuity and courage. The battlefield itself seemed to shift under their control, not through brute force, but through strategy and determination. The aftermath would ripple far beyond that morning. Command reports later detailed the success of the Shermans using white phosphorus to neutralize heavier German tanks, delay reinforcements, and create openings for infantry to advance with fewer casualties. The psychological impact on German crews was immense. No longer could they assume the Sherman was merely a disposable medium tank. Its reputation had changed in the eyes of all who witnessed its performance, proving that ingenuity, preparation, and bravery could overcome raw technological superiority. Jimmy and Bill knew this truth, and it would guide their actions in battles yet to come. As the sun rose higher, burning through the mist, the field was quiet again, except for the distant rumble of other Shermans maneuvering in preparation for their next objectives. Jimmy wiped his brow and glanced at the destroyed Tiger, a grim reminder of what could be achieved through skill, courage, and the clever use of available resources. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Sherman, mocked and underestimated, had burned through a legend, and in doing so, had rewritten the expectations of what a medium tank could accomplish in the crucible of war. Even as they moved forward, Jimmy thought about the men who would tell the story of this day, and the soldiers who would remember the Shermans not as inferior machines, but as tools of survival, courage, and tactical brilliance. He understood that the victory was not just the destruction of the Tiger, but the affirmation that innovation, teamwork, and audacity could triumph over raw power alone. The Sherman's legacy, he realized, was not in its armor thickness or gun caliber, but in the minds and hearts of the men who drove it, fired it, and refused to be intimidated by legends. And as he glanced at Bill, the older sergeant's eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and pride, Jimmy knew that together they had done something remarkable, something history would whisper about in decades to come, even if most never knew the names behind the guns or the courage behind the trigger. The Sherman rolled forward slowly, engine coughing and sputtering through the soft, churned dirt of the Normandy fields, tracks crushing fragile wildflowers that had somehow survived the relentless artillery and bombing that had scarred this land for weeks. The morning mist clung stubbornly to the hedgerows, curling in pale wisps around broken tree trunks and shattered stone fences, lending the battlefield an eerie, almost surreal calm. Corporal James, Jimmy Harlan, age 29, gripped the loader's handle with trembling hands, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down like a storm over his shoulders. He had grown up in Toledo, Ohio, a city of iron and grit, where engines were friends and machines spoke in a language he understood deeply. That language had carried him through mechanics school, through quiet nights under street lamps, and now it was keeping him alive in the heart of enemy territory. He loaded the first white phosphorus round into the 75mm breech, the shell catching the weak sunlight and gleaming like a shard of molten silver. "Ready?" he asked softly, his voice almost lost in the distant echoes of gunfire from previous skirmishes. Sergeant William Bill Matthews, age 36, the seasoned veteran of countless European campaigns, peered through the binoculars fixed to the Sherman's turret. His face was creased with years of experience, lines carved by cold nights, fear, and the silent grief of comrades lost along the way. He nodded once, curtly, without taking his eyes off the darn, Tiger's looming silhouette. "When that Tiger opens fire, we don't dodge. We force it to react," he said, voice low and calm, carrying the authority of a man who had survived situations far worse than any panic could conjure. The Tiger sat like a mountain of steel in the mist, 40 tons of German engineering mastery, its 88mm high-velocity cannon pivoting slowly, each motion deliberate and threatening. Smoke from previous bombardments hung low in the air, mingling with the early morning fog, reducing visibility to a few hundred meters. The Tiger's turret pivoted almost imperceptibly, barrel glinting in the dim light, tracking like a predator sensing the movement of prey, and every shift of its bulk made Jimmy's heart hammer faster. The air was thick, charged with tension, and the battlefield seemed to pause, holding its breath along with the men inside the Sherman. Jimmy's thoughts raced back to the countless hours of preparation, the drills they had, repeated in silence, and the whispered lessons from older veterans. Never engage a Tiger head-on unless you had the element of surprise, they had been told. The Tiger's armor was nearly impervious to the Sherman's 75mm gun, at least in a conventional frontal assault. But the Sherman was not a slow, ponderous monster. It was nimble, its mobility underestimated by almost every German crew who had scoffed at it before. Its turret rotation was quick, faster than the Tiger's cumbersome mechanisms, allowing its gun to aim and fire before the heavier tank could respond accurately. Its rate of fire was equally advantageous. A well-trained crew could pump out 15 to 20 rounds per minute, whereas a Tiger's main gun could manage only 4 to 6. And if the Tiger crew was unprepared, distracted, or caught off guard, the Sherman could exploit every millisecond of delay, each shell building, pressure, confusion, and fear inside the enemy tank. Jimmy took a deep breath, the scent of wet soil, smoke, and metal mingling in his nostrils. His fingers tightened around the white phosphorus round, The shell was not designed to penetrate the tiger's formidable armor in the conventional sense, but it had another kind of power incendiary, psychological, unpredictable. When it ignited, the phosphorus burned with a blinding white intensity, producing dense smoke, fire, and an almost tangible panic inside the tank. Jimmy remembered the stories from previous encounters, reports that spoke of tigers abandoned mid-battle, crews scrambling out as the fire consumed their hatches and vision ports. It was a weapon of ingenuity, a way to level the playing field against a tank that otherwise seemed invincible. Bill tapped his binoculars against his chest, a subtle signal. "Move to the rise, give them a shot they won't forget," he said. Jimmy nodded, guiding the Sherman forward, tracks grinding through the churned earth, leaving deep impressions that would be visible for days. The movement had to be smooth, deliberate, yet fast enough to prevent the tiger from tracking them fully. The mist obscured the valley below, but the subtle shimmer of the rising sun could betray their position if they weren't careful. Jimmy kept his eyes on the optics, the weak light reflecting off the polished steel of the tiger's gun barrel, noting the angle and estimating the range. He calculated the trajectory in seconds, a mental map drawn from countless hours of training and instinct honed under fire. The tension inside the Sherman was palpable. Crew members were silent, each lost in their own thoughts of survival, courage, and fear. The driver, Private Thomas Keegan, age 22, gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, listening to the engine's rhythm like a heartbeat that synchronized with the crew's nerves. The loader, Maria Maggie Santos, age 27, adjusted the breech and whispered a prayer to herself, knowing the precision of her work could mean the difference between life and death. The gunner, Sergeant Matthews, monitored the tiger's movements while calculating the angle of attack, a subtle shift of the turret that might exploit a weak spot or a distraction. Every second mattered. Every miscalculation could be fatal. Jimmy whispered under his breath, almost to himself, "This is it. Make them remember why we fight." The words felt heavier than the 75mm gun in his hands. They were fighting not just for survival, but for every man and woman who depended on the success of this mission. For the soldiers waiting in the hedgerows ahead, for the civilians trapped in villages behind enemy lines, for the broader arc of the war that had already consumed millions of lives across Europe. The Sherman, once mocked and ridiculed, would become their instrument of defiance. It was not just a machine, it was a statement. It represented ingenuity over brute strength, courage over fear, and the principle that even the seemingly insignificant could overcome the formidable when skill and strategy were applied. The Sherman advanced another 50 meters, the suspension groaning under uneven terrain. Jimmy felt the vibrations through his palms, the subtle tremor of pistons and gears echoing like a drumbeat of destiny. Visibility remained poor, the mist thickening as it mingled with smoke from destroyed vehicles in the distance. The tiger's barrel pivoted again, sweeping the field like a pendulum, eyes of German steel searching for movement. Jimmy adjusted slightly, keeping the Sherman low, hugging the rise as if the earth itself could shield them from detection. He thought back to the theoretical lessons and tactical diagrams spread across makeshift tables in their temporary command post. The Sherman's speed, combined with turret rotation, allowed them to dictate the engagement distance. If they could circle, flank, or force the tiger to reposition, they could fire, repeatedly before the German tank could fully respond. Each shot could be calculated to target vision slits, periscopes, tracks, and vulnerable joints. Even if the 75mm rounds did not pierce armor directly, they could disrupt crew operations, create panic, and force abandonment. Jimmy knew that psychology was as powerful a weapon as firepower, and in the world of tank warfare, fear could be a decisive factor. He glanced at Bill, who gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Timing," Bill muttered, voice low, "is everything. When we strike, we hit fast, precise, and unrelenting." Jimmy swallowed hard and felt the adrenaline spike. Every sense sharpened. The smell of wet earth, the acrid tang of distant smoke, the subtle creak of the Sherman's hull, the distant metallic groan of the tiger adjusting its position. The world seemed compressed into a narrow, tense focus. The rise, the tiger, the mist, the gun. One wrong movement, one delayed reaction, could be the end. The Sherman's engine rumbled forward another 20 meters. Jimmy adjusted the gun's elevation by the smallest fraction, lining up the phosphorus round for maximum effect. The Tiger remained unaware of the precise timing, relying on its armor and reputation to intimidate. Jimmy felt a grim satisfaction. This was the advantage he had. The Germans underestimated the Sherman, did not anticipate its mobility, its crew skill, or its unconventional ammunition. Today, that underestimation would prove catastrophic. Finally, the moment arrived. Jimmy took a steadying breath, feeling the rhythm of the battlefield, the pulse of the engine beneath him, the weight of his crew's lives and hopes pressing against every muscle. He whispered again, almost reverently, "For the men who cannot fight beside us, for the fallen, for those who hope for freedom now." He squeezed the trigger, and the white phosphorus round leapt from the barrel, hissing through the mist, a blazing comet of defiance aimed at the Tiger that had mocked their bravery from the start. The Sherman's advance had been flawless. The flanks covered, the trajectory calculated, the Tiger momentarily unaware, and the phosphorus round on its way. Jimmy's hands remained steady, even as his heart thundered in his chest. They had reached the rise, held position, and engaged on their terms. The battlefield, once quiet, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. The mist and smoke swirled, carrying with them the scent of wet soil and metal, and the anticipation was almost tangible. Jimmy glanced at Bill once more, the older man's eyes reflecting the same mixture of fear, focus, and unshakable resolve that had guided countless battles. "Make it count," Bill muttered. Jimmy nodded. In that suspended moment, everything hung together. Skill, timing, courage, and the Sherman itself, a mocked, ridiculed machine now poised to prove its worth in a way the world would not soon forget. The Tiger fired first. The deafening roar of the 88mm cannon split the early morning air, vibrating through the ground and rattling the Sherman's hull with a force that seemed almost physical, a brutal reminder of the power contained within the German war machine. Bullets ricocheted off the Sherman's sloped armor, thudding harmlessly into reinforced sections and kicking up small puffs of dust in others. The crew inside the Sherman felt the shocks as though they were punches, each one reverberating through the metal frame, yet they remained steady. Corporal James, Jimmy Harlan, age 29, felt his heart hammering, adrenaline sharpening every sense. His hands, steady but tense, gripped the loader's handle, ready to release the Sherman's counter. He had studied the Tiger's capabilities for months, memorized weak points, turret rotations, angles of fire, and ventilation seams. Today, all that preparation mattered. The smoke from previous skirmishes mingled with the morning mist, forming a ghostly curtain that obscured visibility, but also provided cover, hiding every precise movement from the enemy's line of sight. "Hold steady," Sergeant William Bill Matthews, age 36, muttered from the gunner's seat, his voice calm and authoritative despite the chaos. His eyes, sharp from years of combat, never left the Tiger. He had faced similar tanks before, and each encounter had taught him one fundamental lesson. Fear was contagious, but discipline was deadly. Jimmy's fist slammed the trigger, and the Sherman responded immediately. The white phosphorus shell leapt from the 75mm barrel with a hissing, almost living sound, slicing through the misted air like a bolt of lightning. It struck the Tiger's rear turret hatch with perfect accuracy, igniting a brilliant white flame that erupted outward in a sudden, blinding display. Smoke and sparks poured from ventilation vents and seams, curling upward in thick columns, while the heat and light reflected across the wet earth. The Tiger crew, initially confident in the superiority of their armored fortress, scrambled desperately, trying to contain the fire, shouting orders in frantic German, voices thick with panic and disbelief. The Sherman circled with deliberate precision, turret sweeping methodically, guns ready for follow-up shots. Each successive round hit calculated points, vision ports, hatches, exposed tracks. The fire and smoke disrupted every attempt by the Tiger crew to coordinate. turning what was once a disciplined war machine into a chaotic furnace of fear. Metal groaned as the hull and turret absorbed heat, buckling slightly under the intense flames, a reminder that even steel had its limits. Inside, the German soldiers flailed, throwing off gear and attempting to extinguish the fire with blankets and water cans, but every effort was met with failure. The Sherman's strategy, combined with white phosphorus's unpredictability, magnified the psychological effect. The once feared Tiger was reduced to a vessel of terror, its armor irrelevant against the chaos within. From the distant hedgerows, other Allied Shermans observed the exchange, engines idling, barrels tracking the unfolding destruction. The sight inspired crews across the field. What they were witnessing defied conventional expectations. A medium tank, mocked and derided as a mere fire hazard in a tin can, dominating a machine considered the pinnacle of armoured warfare. Slowly, coordination took shape among the nearby Shermans. Drivers and gunners communicated with hand signals and pre-arranged codes, leveraging mobility and rate of fire to their advantage. Each Sherman moved deliberately, creating overlapping fields of fire, preventing the Tiger from recovering composure. Where armor failed to provide supremacy, strategy and ingenuity prevailed. Where raw power could not dominate, human skill reshaped the battlefield. Jimmy, reloaded, hands swift and precise, heart still hammering, eyes fixed on the Tiger as it writhed in its fiery prison. He had known from the start that the Sherman could not match the Tiger in brute force. It was a machine designed for versatility and support, not head-to-head destruction of 20-ton-plus German behemoths. But that limitation had been turned into strength. By exploiting the Tiger's vulnerabilities, slower turret rotation, heavier weight, and overconfidence, the Sherman crew turned a weakness into an opportunity. Each phosphorus round that left the barrel was a calculated risk, a tool of both destruction and psychological warfare. Jimmy felt a grim satisfaction as smoke and flames obscured the Tiger, hearing the distant shouts of the German crew fading into panic. He imagined the surprise on their faces, the realization that the much-maligned Sherman was not just holding its own but controlling the engagement entirely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Tiger fired again, this time a more desperate shot, the 88mm round slamming into the earth nearby and kicking up clods of mud in a violent explosion. The impact shook the Sherman, but did not pierce the armor. Jimmy, adrenaline sharp and muscles coiled, adjusted the aim slightly, accounting for the recoil, the wind, and the uneven terrain. Another white phosphorus shell was loaded and fired in rapid succession, the hiss slicing through the haze. The flame engulfed a section of the Tiger's turret side, catching control levers and external fittings. Sparks flew, metal twisted, and smoke poured thickly into the sky. From inside, the German crew's panic intensified. Commands were shouted, voices cracking, and in the confusion, mistakes multiplied. The gunner left his station, attempting to assist the commander, only to be forced back by the flames. Every movement was delayed, every decision compromised, the Sherman's crew exploiting these moments with disciplined efficiency. Nearby, Private Thomas Keegan, age 22, managed the Sherman's maneuvering controls with focused intensity. The engine hummed and rattled under his hands, suspension groaning as the tank pivoted, tracks grinding through churned soil and crushed flora. He maintained a constant distance, keeping the Sherman mobile, preventing the Tiger from establishing a stable firing angle. Mobility was their ally. Every shift of the Sherman required the Tiger to readjust, slowing response time and increasing crew confusion. Each deliberate maneuver allowed Jimmy to fire again, each shell exploiting weaknesses, each strike building a crescendo of terror within the enemy tank. Maria Maggie Santos, age 27, maintained the breach with flawless timing, a quiet intensity that belied the danger surrounding them. Her fingers worked with mechanical precision, loading, aligning, and preparing rounds in a rhythm that matched the Sherman's controlled advance. She understood the stakes, the careful choreography of fire and movement that could decide lives, One misfire, one delay, could end everything. The Sherman was a well-oiled system of human and machine, each member of the crew a vital component, and together they became far more formidable than any single gun or armor plate could measure. The Tiger, once a symbol of invincibility, began to falter. Smoke obscured vision slits, fire charred metal surfaces, and the crew's panic translated into errors. Misaligned guns, delayed turret rotations, and chaotic internal movement. The Sherman circled with strategic precision, never presenting itself as a static target, always keeping the Tiger on its heels. Each calculated movement forced the German crew into reactive positions, preventing them from regaining composure. The psychological impact was as decisive as the physical damage. Fear, confusion, and heat combined into a potent adversary that no armor could resist. From a distance, Allied observers marked the Tiger's decline. Other Shermans coordinated movements, exploiting openings, flanking positions, and timing attacks to reinforce the psychological and physical strain. It was a lesson in how human ingenuity, combined with disciplined coordination and unconventional tactics, could overcome superior raw power. The battle was no longer about armor thickness or cannon caliber. It was about timing, mobility, precision, and the willingness to exploit every opportunity. The Tiger had lost control, and the Sherman, once mocked as obsolete, had seized it entirely. Jimmy felt the weight of this realization, a mix of exhaustion and vindication. The Sherman, a medium tank derided for its perceived weaknesses, had performed a feat few would have believed possible. He could almost hear the whispers of history shifting, the narrative changing in the smoke and heat of that field. Each Phosphorus round fired, each strategic maneuver executed, each burst of mechanical precision had combined to rewrite expectations. The once feared Tiger now writhed under flames, its superiority nullified not by a single, overwhelming strike, but by the careful application of knowledge, skill, and courage. The battle continued in waves, the Tiger's crew scrambling for survival, opening hatches in desperation, trying to extinguish flames that spread faster than they could react. The Sherman circled, fired, and moved in a seamless pattern that kept the enemy disoriented. Every hit was calculated. Tracks, observation ports, external fittings. Even without direct armor penetration, the damage was absolute. Panic ruled inside the Tiger, and as the smoke thickened, its crew abandoned hope. One by one, they climbed from hatches, throwing aside weapons and gear, faces twisted in fear, hands shielding themselves from flames. The Sherman had imposed order and control, transforming chaos into strategic dominance. Jimmy allowed himself a brief glance around the field. Allied Shermans advanced, engines rumbling, confident now in the demonstration unfolding before them. This was more than just a tactical victory. It was proof that strategy, coordination, and human ingenuity could triumph where raw strength alone failed. The battlefield itself had shifted under the Sherman's influence, every movement dictating terms to the enemy. The Tiger, a mountain of steel and fear, had been reduced to a defeated shell by the precise and innovative application of weaponry and crew skill. Jimmy's heart surged with quiet pride, knowing they had achieved something remarkable. As the smoke rose into the morning mist, mingling with the scent of burnt metal and phosphorus, Jimmy, Bill, Maggie, and Thomas continued their relentless circling and firing. The Tiger's groans grew weaker, its once imposing presence reduced to chaos and fear. From a distance, other crews absorbed the lesson. Coordination, mobility, fire rate, and psychological tactics could outweigh raw armor and firepower. Where the Germans had assumed superiority, the Sherman had proven dominance through human skill and ingenuity. It was a moment that would be remembered long after the war, a demonstration of how clever application could transform even a mocked, underestimated machine into a decisive weapon. The Tiger crew, now forced entirely into flight or surrender, abandoned their once feared tank. Flames and smoke continued to rise from the rear turret hatch, consuming metal and instruments, leaving only the distorted silhouette of a machine that had been unbeatable in theory. but utterly defeated in practice. Jimmy, still at the loader's station, allowed himself the first deep exhale in minutes. The Sherman had fired first, it had manoeuvred with precision, and it had harnessed the fear and ingenuity necessary to turn the tables. It was a victory not measured in tonnage or firepower alone, but in strategy, courage, and the intelligent application of available tools. Even as the Tiger smouldered, the battle's lesson echoed clearly. Underestimation was a weakness, and adaptability was strength. The Sherman, mocked for its perceived vulnerabilities, had revealed its true power, proving that a combination of ingenuity, speed, coordinated fire, and psychological impact could overcome even the most formidable armor. Jimmy and his crew understood this truth with clarity, feeling the weight of responsibility, the surge of triumph, and the certainty that this day would be remembered, even if only by those who had witnessed it firsthand. For nearly 20 minutes, the two forces exchanged fire across the misted Normandy hedgerows, each salvo a test of nerve, skill, and timing. The air vibrated with the explosions of shells, the hiss of white phosphorus rounds, and the sharp staccato of machine guns echoing through the early morning haze. Every second stretched like an eternity as the Sherman's crew worked in silent coordination, anticipating the Tiger's moves and exploiting every minute weakness. Corporal James, Jimmy Harlan, age 29, crouched over the loading mechanism, sweat streaking the grime on his forehead, hands moving with mechanical precision. Each round of white phosphorus that left the 75mm barrel hissed through the air, a tiny streak of liquid fire aimed with care, landing exactly where Jimmy intended. The bright white flames erupted upon contact, licking the steel of the Tiger's turret and side panels, sending heat and smoke curling into the early light. Every shot was not just a strike but a psychological assault, designed to terrorize, confuse, and break the resolve of the enemy crew. Sergeant William Bill Matthews, age 36, leaned over the sights with the calm of a man who had seen death too many times to flinch. His eyes, trained and unyielding, tracked the movement of the German tank with obsessive precision. He called out adjustments, each word clipped and deliberate. Left 5 degrees. Now fire, he barked, and Jimmy obeyed instantly. High explosive shells followed the incendiary rounds, smashing into tracks, vision ports, and periscopes, disabling what the armor could not stop. The Tiger's attempts to respond were methodical, but delayed. The 88mm gun, a weapon of terrifying power, could only fire so quickly. By the 5th volley of white phosphorus shells, the interior of the German tank was a searing furnace. Smoke filled the cabin, twisting and curling under the ventilation vents, while the heat warped metal and made even the simplest movements agonizing. Inside the Tiger, panic had replaced discipline. The machine guns jammed under the stress of smoke and heat, their mechanisms unable to function under such extreme conditions. Vision slits melted from the intense flames, obscuring the crew's ability to aim or coordinate. The once feared weapon, a 40-ton behemoth of precision engineering, became a trap, an inferno in which the soldiers struggled for survival. One by one, they abandoned the tank, scrambling for cover in the fields and hedgerows, faces blackened with soot and sweat, hands blistered from escaping the flaming metal. Each movement outside the safety of the armor carried risk, yet remaining inside guaranteed certain harm. The Sherman crew observed from a safe distance, firing opportunistically at the exposed crew, driving them further into panic. The psychological toll was evident. Fear was now the enemy's primary opponent, more potent than any shell or bullet could ever be. Bill slapped Jimmy on the shoulder, the motion both celebratory and grounding. "I told them they'd regret mocking us," he said, voice carrying a mix of triumph and relief. Jimmy allowed himself a small, grim smile, feeling the weight of the past month's training, fear, and anticipation lift slightly. The battlefield, which had been eerily quiet moments before, now roared with explosions, plumes of smoke, and the unmistakable echoes of victory. The ground was scarred with craters from missed shots and near hits, and the smell of burnt metal, scorched earth, and phosphorus lingered in the thick morning air. Birds that had survived the first weeks of fighting circled above, startled and uneasy, their calls sharp against the mechanical symphony below. Nearby, other German tanks hesitated, crews unsure whether to advance or retreat. Their confidence had been shattered by the Sherman's unexpected tactics. The white phosphorus rounds, combined with coordinated flanking maneuvers, had turned a medium tank once mocked as obsolete and unreliable into a symbol of ingenuity and terror. What the Sherman lacked in raw armor, they compensated for in speed, mobility, rate of fire, and psychological impact. The battlefield had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Hesitation replaced aggression, fear replaced bravado, and the momentum was now firmly with the Allies. Private Thomas Keegan, age 22, maintained the Sherman's positioning with precise control over the steering levers. The tracks churned up mud, crushed hedgerows, and tore through wildflowers, each movement deliberate to maintain optimal angles of attack. The Sherman pivoted and rotated, ensuring that no single tiger shot could land without delay. Jimmy reloaded without pause, firing in bursts that synchronized perfectly with the tank's movements. Every shot was deliberate, every maneuver calculated. The coordination between loader, gunner, and driver was flawless, a testament to both training and trust. Each crew member relied implicitly on the others, understanding that even a fraction of a second's hesitation could allow the enemy to regain composure. From a distance, the Allied commanders observed with growing admiration. The performance of a medium tank against a feared heavy machine had exceeded all expectations. It was a demonstration of asymmetric advantage. Speed, maneuverability, and fire discipline had nullified raw power. The Tiger, with its armor and 88mm gun, was formidable only in a static, ideal engagement. In a dynamic, unpredictable environment, it was vulnerable to psychological and tactical exploitation. The Sherman crew had mastered these dynamics, turning every perceived weakness into an asset. Jimmy's hands trembled slightly as he prepared another white phosphorus round, his mind racing with the lessons of the last 20 minutes. Heat, smoke, and sound surrounded them, a cacophony of mechanical rage and human determination. He considered the mockery they had endured, the nicknames, the scorn of those who underestimated the Sherman. Ronson, Tommy Cooker, fire hazard in a tin can, every word echoed in his memory. Yet now, with each successive volley and each precise maneuver, those insults seemed hollow. The Sherman had transformed from a symbol of inadequacy into an instrument of triumph. It was a lesson in innovation, teamwork, and the relentless application of strategy over raw power. Maggie Santos, age 27, managed the breach with unwavering precision. Each shell loaded, each alignment made, carried the weight of survival and victory. She could feel the heat of the fire through the tank's metal, the tremor of every near impact. Her movements were fluid, instinctive, a combination of training and adrenaline. Around her, Jimmy and Bill coordinated seamlessly, a trio functioning as one mind. The Sherman's design allowed this. A reliable engine, a responsive turret, and a crew-oriented layout ensured that human skill could be applied effectively, turning what some considered flaws into tactical advantages. The Tiger's crew, now disorganized and terrified, scattered into the surrounding hedgerows and fields. Their once feared weapon had been neutralized without a single direct penetration of its thickest armor. The psychological impact was overwhelming. Even as metal twisted and smoke billowed, it was the terror of the white phosphorus, the chaos of the battlefield, and the relentless precision of the Sherman crew that had truly decided the engagement. From every angle, it became clear that adaptability, speed, and coordinated firepower could outweigh raw strength. Jimmy felt a quiet satisfaction in this truth, understanding that the Sherman's greatest power lay not in the thickness of its armor or the size of its cannon, but in the creativity and courage of those who operated it. Bill called for a brief repositioning, guiding the Sherman to a small rise for better visibility. The tank moved smoothly, treads crushing the mud and debris underfoot, engine humming steadily despite the stress of continuous firing. The smoke from the Tiger's interior twisted in thick spirals, heat radiating outward, a visual testament to the precision and effectiveness of their assault. Allied Shermans in nearby positions mirrored these tactics, coordinating movements, maintaining pressure, and reinforcing the psychological dominance established by Jimmy and his crew. The Tiger, once a figure of terror, was now reduced to a smouldering reminder of the limits of brute force against ingenuity. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the battlefield, the Sherman continued its methodical advance. The air smelled of scorched metal, sulfur, and the faint tang of blood, but amidst this, the crew maintained focus, firing with precision, coordinating movements, and exploiting every vulnerability. Every maneuver, every shot reinforced a simple truth: the mocked medium tank was now the arbiter of the field. Where raw armor had once intimidated, clever tactics now commanded respect. Where brute force had ruled, human skill and ingenuity had triumphed. The Tiger's fire ceased entirely as its crew abandoned hope, retreating to regroup and reassess. Jimmy, Bill, Maggie, and Thomas held position, watching the once feared German machine lie smouldering under the morning sun, twisted metal and scorched paint testament to the Sherman's unexpected dominance. The battlefield, momentarily quiet, resonated with the echoes of a decisive victory. Allies nearby allowed themselves cautious cheers, acknowledging the triumph not just of weaponry, but of strategy, timing, and human courage. Bill clapped Jimmy on the shoulder again, a gesture heavy with respect and relief. "They'll never underestimate the Sherman again," he said, voice low but firm. Jimmy allowed himself a deep exhale, heart still pounding, adrenaline gradually giving way to the clarity of victory. They had turned a mocked, derided machine into a symbol of tactical brilliance. The battlefield had shifted, the enemy's confidence shattered, and the Sherman's legacy redefined in just 20 minutes of relentless, precise, and intelligent combat. Even as smoke continued to rise from the Tiger's remains, the lessons were clear. The battlefield was no longer simply about armor or firepower alone. Speed, maneuverability, rate of fire, psychological pressure, and human ingenuity had turned perceived weakness into overwhelming strength. The Sherman had achieved what many considered impossible. It had defeated the Tiger without relying on brute force alone. Jimmy and his crew understood this truth intimately, feeling the weight of history forming in the smoke, fire, and twisted steel around them. In that moment, the Normandy fields, scarred and blackened, bore witness not just to destruction, but to ingenuity and courage. The Sherman, once mocked and underestimated, had proven its worth. Every shell fired, every maneuver executed, and every psychological blow delivered was a testament to the skill, bravery, and determination of the crew. They had taken what others considered obsolete, what the enemy had scorned, and turned it into a weapon of victory, proving that strategy and ingenuity could outmatch raw power and fear. When the smoke cleared, the Tiger lay silent, charred, a monument to the unexpected cunning of a medium tank. The M4 Sherman, once derided and mocked, now seemed almost proud, its 75mm barrel still warm from the battle, its treads smeared with mud and remnants of fire. Corporal James Jimmy Harlan, age 29, climbed from the hatch, limbs stiff, face streaked with soot and sweat. The air was thick with the smell of burning metal, scorched earth, and the acrid tang of white phosphorus. Heart still pounding, Jimmy glanced back at the blackened hulks of hedgerows, the small craters pockmarking the fields, and realized they had survived what many had considered impossible. Around him, Sergeant William Bill Matthews, age 36, emerged from the Sherman with a wary smile, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning German armor. His eyes softened, momentarily, betraying relief beneath the hardened exterior of a veteran who had seen too many friends fall in less fortunate battles. The battlefield would remember the M4 Sherman not for fragility, not for its tendency to catch fire under ideal circumstances, but for resilience, adaptability, and the ingenuity of its crews. Reports began to filter in from other divisions. Shermans using white phosphorus rounds had forced multiple Tiger crews to abandon their tanks, leaving their once feared weapons smouldering in open fields. These delays bought precious hours for infantry and armoured units elsewhere, allowing reinforcements to consolidate positions and saving countless lives. The seemingly obsolete tank had rewritten its own reputation in the crucible of combat, proving that skill, strategy, and courage could offset what raw firepower could not. Jimmy knelt beside the burned-out Tiger, brushing ash from the insignia, and whispered, "They mocked us. But we burned a legend today." The words hung in the smoky air, heavy with satisfaction and solemnity. Bill placed a firm hand on Jimmy's shoulder, his gaze sweeping across the horizon, where morning light now glimmered over scarred fields. "And tomorrow," he said, voice steady and determined, "we do it again if we have to. The Sherman isn't just a tank, it's a statement." Around them, the battlefield remained quiet, but its echoes carried far beyond. The lesson was clear. Innovation, courage, and determination could turn even the most underestimated weapon into a harbinger of victory. In that moment, amid fire and ash, the Sherman had earned its place in history. Decades later, in 1967, Jimmy Harlan, age 52, returned to a museum just outside Caen, France. The morning sun filtered through high windows, illuminating a restored M4 Sherman that gleamed under the soft glow of exhibition lights. Its 75mm barrel reflected the warm light, polished and unscarred. A far cry from the smoke-stained, battle-worn machine Jimmy had commanded in Normandy over 23 years earlier. Beside the tank, a simple brass plaque bore the inscription, "In memory of the medium tank that defied expectations, burned through legends, and carried the fight for freedom." He ran a finger along the barrel, tracing the smooth metal as if it could somehow carry him back to that smoky battlefield, back to the roar of engines, the hiss of white phosphorus, and the echo of German curses. Across the room, historians debated animatedly over armour thickness, penetration values, and tactical doctrine, scribbling notes and adjusting charts. Jimmy listened quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. They spoke of technical specifications, missing the truth he had lived. The Sherman's power had never been only in its metal. It had been in the men who understood it, who moved with ingenuity, and who had the courage to fight smarter, not merely harder. Each Tiger that fell, each crew that survived, was a testament to human skill and daring. In the end, the mocked, the underestimated, the supposedly obsolete M4 Sherman had left its mark on history, proving that even the most unlikely weapon could burn through giants, rewrite expectations, and secure a legacy that endured far beyond the smoke and fire of battle. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.